Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're really thrilled that you could join us today for On Falling Back in Love with Being Human. My name is Alex, and I'm the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university located in San Francisco. While we are all joining from different places all over the world, as a representative of CIIS, I want to take a moment to acknowledge our debt and gratitude to the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original peoples and continual caretakers of the San Francisco Peninsula. CIIS's main campus is located on the traditional, unceded lands of the Ramaytush Ohlone, which they call Yelamu. This acknowledgement is just one very small step towards being in deeper connection and relationship with Indigenous tribes and organizations in our own community. And it doesn't begin to acknowledge all of the native lands, languages, and territories where you are right now or where you live and work every day. I want to invite you to take a moment now, as we are all together gathering in this space before the conversation, to acknowledge the land where you reside, and to commit to learn more about the Native communities near you and to support their work. If it feels right for you to share in the chat where you're coming from or some more information about Native communities near you or their work, please do. We always recommend native-land.ca as a starting resource if you don't know where to begin. Before we start the conversation tonight, I have a couple of general tips, some troubleshooting items to go over. If you are watching the live stream, you can participate in our live Q&A, which will take place after the conversation this evening. Please submit your questions at any time using that web form, which is linked in the event description just below this video. We do have automatically generated captions for this event, and you can toggle those on and off using that closed captioning button right in YouTube. You may have noticed chat is enabled for this event, but please note it is not being moderated and our presenters cannot see that chat. Chat is not required to fully experience the event, and we really encourage you to turn it off if you find that it's negatively impacting your experience in any way. If you do choose to participate in chat, please be respectful and avoid language that could be offensive or insensitive to others. If you are having issues with your audio or video, we always suggest that you start by refreshing this page. And then if you're still having issues, it can really help to adjust your video settings right within YouTube. Now let me first introduce our presenters, Kai Cheng and Jenna, and then we'll get right to their conversation. Jenna Robinson is an expressive arts therapist, performance poet, and musician located in the Bay Area. She is a two-time Grand Slam champion of Hawaii Slam and has competed on 7 national slam poetry teams. She received her MA in Expressive Arts Therapy from CIIS, where she developed a methodology melding narrative therapy, expressive arts, and spoken word poetry. She has facilitated trauma-informed writing workshops with adults, youth, and families, and specializes in working with people experiencing family violence. She is core faculty in the Expressive Arts Therapy program at CIIS and at the Wright Institute. Cheng Thom is a certified somatic sex educator, qualified mediator, clinical hypnotherapist, and certified professional coach based in Toronto. She is also the author of 5 award-winning books in various genres. Kai Cheng's work focuses on the intersection of social justice, pleasure activism, and transformative approaches to healing conflict. A noted speaker and practitioner of somatic wellness, healing, and group process facilitation, Kai Cheng supports individuals and groups who are seeking to repair relationships and make transformative change. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Kai Cheng and Jenna.
Hello, everyone.
We're both on that same place. Yes. Hello. Hello.
Hi.
So excited to see you and to talk to you and to hold this space with you. So thank you for being willing to be a part of this conversation and share this with our community.
Oh, thank you so much for being willing to hold the space and for bringing me in. I am so excited for our talk.
Yeah. Well, I just want to start with I'm in love with your book, I think.
Thank you.
Really I'm surprised that I'm in love with it because, you know, the typical book that says falling back in love with something doesn't necessarily register as something that,
That is really fair.
yeah, but I think that you did that with such um nuance and complexity. I think you do a wonderful job of holding the weight of love. So
Mm.
I and all that comes with that. So I want to first thank you for putting this out. Um, and if it's okay to kind of jump in, I have so many questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Um, well, I'm curious, like who this book is for. I know you have a dedication at the start that it's for the monsters who are still waiting to be loved. But
Mm.
I'm wondering, yeah, who that is, and what the book is for.
Thanks so much for that question and for noting the dedication as well. For all the monsters who are still waiting to be loved, someone asked me that recently, like, who are the monsters? And I was like, huh, everybody. The monsters
Mm.
are everybody.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there are different like species of monster out there in the world. You know, I
Mhm.
am maybe a few, maybe you might be a few as well.
Yeah, I'm sure people in my sphere would love to tell you that. Yeah.
But really, you know, this book is about trying to um, reach across pain, suffering, even harm or violence, and find connection
Mm.
with the people that we see as monstrous in the world. And I think that the deeper we go into that journey, the more we have to realize that the monster we fear the most is the monster inside of ourselves.
Yeah.
And so this book is about that. It feels particularly relevant to me right now because of the global context that we are living in.
Yeah.
There's so much violence going on, and yeah, this book is about finding, rediscovering faith in humanity despite all the horrible things that we do to each other.
Hmm. Yeah, that we can really make each other the monster, which can rationalize the violence that
Exactly.
we enact. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So are you I'm hearing that this book then is it a tool to get to that? Is it a prayer? Is it a hope to get to that place? And is there someone in particular that you're hoping reads it?
Mm. Well, you know, I like to think of this book as a spell book,
Mm,
or maybe a book of prayers, probably both.
yeah.
And really, when I wrote it, the spells or prayers were mostly for me. Like I was like, what are the words that I can say that will change me back into a person that I love?
Mm.
And that's sort of the primary purpose, you know, of the book, to turn me specifically back into a lovable person.
Mm.
And then I kind of think that if other people find some aspect of that in it for themselves, so much the better, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the power of poetry
Oh,
to be a spell, to be a prayer, an incantation for something that you wish for yourself. Do I Did you find that? Were you able to step into that in the process of writing this book?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's sort of come as a surprise. I didn't start to think about it until recently. I've been doing interviews about the book, and people have asked me, you know, like, how does it feel afterward? What did it do for you? And you know, for me, the ultimate version of that question is, did I fall back in love with being human after writing the book? And I'm really happy to say, yeah, I did.
Mm, mm,
Yeah, yeah. It's what I want to share with the world, that is possible.
yeah. You're a somatics person, so I'm curious. what does that feel like? Like, actually, what does that actually feel like in your body to fall back in love with being human, to fall back in love with yourself?
Mm, yes. Um, it feels actually like blossoming or unfolding,
Mm.
like a flower blooming inside of me.
Mm.
And then if I'm gonna get really like wooey with it, I might say it feels like that flower is made of light.
Mm. Mhm. I mean, to get you, this is the place to get wooey. I don't know if you know
Right.
about
I
CIIS.
have
Like
been
this,
told.
this is it. It is the university of that, which is why I think why we're so special.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
I wonder, like, how, how you found the courage to turn to that, to turn back towards love, and what maybe advice you would give to others who want to go on that journey.
Mm. Well, it's very mysterious to me. Like I'm still kind of trying to figure that out, to like search inside my body. I'm not even sure it's like that it is courage. It feels so
Mm.
much more like despair. You know, so I go through these periods of time where I'm like, I guess I'll never write again, you know? And then I feel some sort of crisis happen upon me, and I'm like, I guess I have to write a book now.
Mm.
And this book absolutely comes from despair. It was 2021. J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter series, had just put out, a statement about her feelings on trans people, which was very distressing to me. And also, we were in the midst of the first wave of the pandemic, and there were a number of really terrible things that had happened in my personal life, and like really awful things, like things where I really got to witness, yet again, how terrible people can be and how terrible I can be.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like succumb to despair or write a book. And I
Mm.
chose write a book, and still don't really know why or how that was the choice that was made. But it reminds me a lot of what we see sometimes in meditative traditions or spiritual traditions, of like falling into the pit, right? Or the long dark night of the soul. In those moments where we are in crisis, sometimes we discover an unknown strength.
Mm.
And I'm just really grateful that that's what happened this time around.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm. I appreciate the reframe that it's coming from a place of despair, but I think sometimes, like you said, people just succumb to despair. They aren't
Yeah.
mobilized by it, and you made a choice
Yes.
to turn towards love and action. You speak of J.K. Rowling, you have a letter to her, a love letter in here too,
Yes.
which I was like, stop. Like, I couldn't believe. And I think that because it was heartfelt. It wasn't sarcastic. You're
Oh
not
no.
you really are being genuine of trying to reach towards her or other people like her. And I think a lot of people are lost for knowing how to turn to courage in those moments of despair.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I think that for me is so much about commitment and like devotion. Devotion as practice, right? Like if
Yeah.
we come back to somatics, there's like a popular saying in the somatics world. I think it comes from the Strozzi lineage of like, and that saying is we are what we practice. We become what
Mm.
we practice.
Hmm.
And I really love that so much because practice is not reliant upon feeling. I might feel overwhelmed by despair, but I can still practice something else in the midst of that. I don't have to be despair if I'm practicing something different. And that loss you're talking about, that like feeling of like, well, how do I reach for love, or how do I reach toward the other that is my enemy, or the other that feels so monstrous? that's a practice. And we get stronger and more skillful at that if we commit to it and do it over and over again.
Mm-hmm. I feel you. So I feel you, and I can see the intention in your practice, the strength towards turning towards and building that habit of doing that. But our society doesn't teach us that. You know,
No.
we're taught very much the opposite. And I wonder, maybe, like, how can people, what communities could people be in? What places could people go to start to build that practice in a society that is so opposed to it, or can seem so opposed to it?
Yes, and there's a lot of illusion, you know,
Yeah.
in the dominant culture, right? A lot of conditioning to practice defensiveness, defendedness, which, and there's nothing wrong with defending oneself, of course, but you know, where the deception comes in is where we are told, well, that other group out there is dangerous, and therefore we should defend ourselves by any means necessary, and that becomes like a refrain, and we practice it over and over again, and we see it in every microcosm of, you know, the oppressive system that we live in. People are taught to be afraid of marginally housed or homeless people, and so this justifies the practice of, you know, horrific forms of policing and architecture. White folks are taught to be afraid of Black and Indigenous folks, and so this justifies all kinds of horrific violence towards racialized communities, right? Over and over and over again, we see this kind of like defendedness that is sort of pushed into an extreme. We practice dehumanizing others in the name of our own security. And I mean, I really love your question about like what kind of community could we be in? What would be possible for us if we didn't live in that fear? Because I think that is the key to unlocking, you know, within our bodies and the collective body, what like how to really build like an abolitionist society, where we don't police one another, and where governance is not defined by the legitimized use of violence.
That's a word.
So I just threw all that up there.
Right. Well, yes. I mean, so much is coming up. I mean, you're reminding me. I think you talk quite a bit about different types of monsters. You know, you said the external monster, the internal monster, and I think I remember you talking about fear as a monster as well.
Yes.
And shoving away kind of all the things we fear. And you know, as you were talking, I was thinking about, you know, the way that we defend ourselves from our own monsters, that internal monster, the shame of having the fear of having to feel that shame about who we are, what we've done. We project that onto other people. We make someone else the monster, so we don't have to feel it. So I'm kind of hearing that there's a dual thing happening. You have to, in order to love others, you have to turn towards yourself. Like and it has to happen at the same time. I think folks say, well, you can't love yourself if you've never loved others, or
I've heard that.
You can't love others if you've never loved yourself. And I mean, I think you just got to do both.
Yeah, it's sort of two at a time.
Yeah. I'm so on that. I'm wondering how do we relate to what is monstrous to us? Like I named a little bit about shame and projection. And I'm wondering, you know, in the poetic, in the expression, there's so much room for imagination and envisioning what could be possible. And I'm wondering what your vision is for this evolving, for how we can relate to that monster in us.
Yes. I mean, I think that the poetic, like that poetry, especially like the communal, like spoken word, like the kind of work that you do, like poetry that is really in dialogue and alive with as many people as possible, has so much power to de-shame like the monstrous part of ourselves, right? Like, and I think this is so much about like what we long for in community and what we long for in the collective, like to be held despite our most shameful parts, right? And there are so many layers to that. I think on you know like a more surface but really important level is the embracing and like de-shaming of marginalized groups that are like labeled as monstrous, even though we obviously are not, right? Like I'm thinking here about my own experience as a trans woman of color. I'm also thinking about like Black and brown folks, racialized folks, disabled folks who are, you know, so frequently labeled as monstrous by the dominant majority. You know, I think poetry has the power to unveil like how that kind of stigmatization happens, and then bring people together, you know, in the spirit of justice. And I think spoken word poets, you know, like yourself, have been doing that, you know, for many years now, and it's work that needs to continue. And then I think, you know, on a deeper level, but you know, I think, you know, no more or less important is the is like looking at the monstrous within, that is really about how we harm one another's and how we harm ourselves in relationship to one another. I think all the time about how someone like J.K. Rowling, for example, she experiences fear and like her own trauma around abuse, and this is projected onto trans women. I think as well about how she very frequently will make reference to, you know, what are apparently many death threats, and like intense forms of backlash that she gets from the trans community. And I think this kind of like dialogical loop is something that the poetic can help us to unpack and unveil in a good way. Like, it is not okay for someone like J.K. Rowling to use their public platform to stigmatize and attack trans people. And also, maybe it is not okay for trans people to send J.K. Rowling death threats, even though we might understand the feeling, or, you know, like, you know, there's justified anger or pain there. I think poetry allows us to hold that liminal, ambiguous space of like what we do to one another in the midst of our suffering, in a way that politics cannot. Because of course, a strong political line, you know, for trans people would say, well, you know, J.K. Rowling is the person in power. The transphobes are the people in power, and so, you know, we get to defend ourselves. Sure, and that is true from a political perspective. But I think the poetic realm allows us to ask the question, as we are defending ourselves, who do we want to be? What do we want to practice? Who do we want to become? And you know, that's a bit of a scary thing to say, you know, as a political radical. But I think we must be radical in it, and I think that that poetics gives us, you know, so much more space to practice living in the world that we want to create.
You're reminding me a little of some things that Adrienne Maree Brown talks about, and she
Yes.
talks about it, I think, within the, you know, we need to live our activism in the way that we want to create the world. If it's just angry and hard and a struggle, what do you think we're going to create on the other side? You know,
Exactly.
that is the practice that you're saying. So we have to live now in that space of love and joy and pleasure, alongside with the push, with the resistance.
Yes.
Matter of fact, being loving and joyful in an oppressive society is resistance itself. And
Absolutely.
you know, politics is, there's no room for that in politics, the way that we have created it. Maybe in a different iteration that perhaps we can dream of and actually create and put into place, maybe. But it's so polarized, and I appreciate you naming that. The like poetics has space. It is so much more. And I really appreciate you bringing in spoken word slam. You know, the performance poet has been at the microphone.
Totally.
You know, at the heart of a lot of movements, for beyond, you know, beyond when slam as we know it, you know, spoken word, it's been at the root of our activism since forever.
Mhm.
I'm curious, I think you were kind of mentioning this a little bit. I'm curious a little bit about your thoughts about the role of the witness, you know, the
Mm.
impact stories have, and maybe even thinking about how, you know, your presence, like you being witness, like what impact did that have on you to share your story, to be in your story in front of audiences and people to see you, to receive you? I mean, I think I'm giving you a big question now. I'm just thinking about it a lot, because I think in a lot of your different essays, different parts of the collection, you talk about seeing people. You say, I see
Mm.
you.
Mhm.
So I'm curious about this role of the witness, the witnessing. Yeah. Anything that's coming up for you on that?
Oh my gosh. I love this question. And I'm like, oh, I'm like sweating. This makes me nervous.
I'm seeing you. I see you.
Exactly. Oh my
Yeah.
God. You know, I think hmm, like the collective archetypal role of the witness, I believe, has like the incredible power um to pull away like the veil of shame,
Mm,
but it also has the power to bestow shame and stigmatization.
mm,
And for that reason, I think that the witness, the audience, um, you know, is like a double-headed monster, you know, beautiful and terrible in its way. I started doing spoken word when I was about 19, 18, actually. Yeah, in Montreal. And I mean, it was a beautiful experience. I got like a little tiny bit of mentoring from the Community Vibe Collective. I had some incredible mentorship from like primarily Black poets and musicians, actually. And like to be witnessed in that community was like, whoa, you know, like
mm,
I felt filled with light and power and empowerment. Um, and then I became like sort of, you know, trans famous, you know, and like became more
mm,
visible to like a wider audience that like was maybe like less revolutionary in form or was, you know, yeah, like more exploitative.
mm,
And yeah, I think about this all the time, like how uh, I'm always struggling with the balance between being consumed by my audience and being in communion with my audience. And I think like the skillfulness that comes with being a poet, an orator, a storyteller, um, especially one who is working towards social change in some way, is casting the spell that invites the witness into communion. Like, how
mhm,
can we be together in these words and this story in a way that creates more wisdom, that pulls away that veil of shame and deception and allows more truth to be born into the world? And you need both the storyteller and the, you know, and the listener, the audience, to do that kind of magic. You need yeah, both kind of both parties are required to create more wisdom and more truth. Um, and I think, you know, what's really dangerous, you know, I think I'm thinking here about like the dub poet Debbie Young, who says, you know, if you give an MC without integrity the mic, they will rhyme the death of the people. You
mm,
know, it's very true about poets without integrity. We're seeing a lot of that right now, you know,
mm,
and I think that's true of audiences without integrity too. Like, you know, the danger of being a witness, like in the witness role, is that we don't rely upon our own wisdom in order to interpret what we're hearing. Um, So, I mean, I guess that's my invitation to people who find themselves in the audience, which is to say, all of us at some point in time, to bring our own wisdom with us when we are listening to stories or to poetry, so that we can discern like what is wisdom and what is not.
And not just going with the group think, the way that everybody else is responding, to actually be in your own wisdom. I love that, and I love the idea of you talking about the the parallel of being consumed or being in communion with your audience. I think spoken word poetry scene can really set you up to be consumed.
Hell yeah. I mean, you know, those trauma porn poems. Like,
Oh my
sometimes
gosh.
I just want to pull an 18-year-old off the stage and be like, you don't need to tell that right now.
Yeah, I think there's a part of me. Oh man, let's get into the toxicity of slam.
Yeah,
I
let's
love
do
it.
it.
I've been waiting to have this conversation.
We're ready.
Yeah, I mean, that is actually what brought me into doing expressive arts, like being
Yeah.
in the slam scene and sharing my own trauma stories. And it wasn't like, oh, let me throw this trauma on the stage. It was like I found words for my experience, and I had it's beyond a need. It's beyond an urge to share it. It just was. It had to come out. And the more you do that, the more, you know, people come up to you and talk to you, and you facilitate. I would facilitate these spaces, and I feel like once you teach someone how to write their story, you got to be ready for what comes out.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I wasn't. I
Okay.
wasn't.
Yep.
Which led me to, you know, CIIS. We have an expressive arts therapy program, which I went to, and now I'm a part of. And I think what I was steering away from was the people just throwing trauma poems up for the sake of the competition, for the sake of, you know, how hard can I cry on the stage to get to win? And instead of, you know, the diversity of human experience. So yeah, I think, you know, in that competition realm, it gets really sullied. But I think what you were talking about, really the kind of the Black experience, the Black culture that really formed that space of call and response and an active, supportive witness and audience is the important part. And I mean, clearly why it still operates and lives as much as it does, because it's still a part of it. But it can get so distracted because we get caught up almost in the ego, it sometimes can be really violent. These things can be violent.
Totally. Yeah, no, and I mean, I think you know, there's so much about like the ritual of poetry that needs to be constructed with skill, you know, like the poet needs to have skill, the audience needs to have skill, the slam master or like you know, needs to have some skill. Everyone needs to be skillful. And I think slam culture has, you know, being part of like capitalist competitive kind of culture, you know, strips that away sometimes. But I mean, I love the sound of the work you do. I think, you know, like you know, when I think about narrative therapy in particular, right? Like we have like the client, and then you have also like the witness, and you have the therapist, right? And like there's three people or 3 points in the triangle that are like mediating the story that is being told. And I mean, you know, the slam scene here in Canada kind of collapsed like a while ago, for a lot of reasons. You know, some of it was like kind of what you're talking about now, and we have this opportunity to, you know, create a new one. And there's been some incredible conversation, you know, between you know, veteran poets and organizers of the scene here, some of whom are also pursuing like expressive arts therapy now as like kind of a way to learn more about like how do we create this, like how do we teach people to tell a story in a way that is about like going through the arc like of their process, right? And how do we facilitate audiences to be reflective and responsive in a way that doesn't like reward or encourage like unprocessed sharing, you know? Yeah, I really believe that like some evolution of the slam might be able to hold stories in a better way, particularly if we like build the community, so that like there's like long-term knowledge that I'm getting really nerdy about this now, but I'm just like
I'm here for it.
you know, like we really need to like build ritual practice, I think,
Totally.
that is about healing and not what's the most like sensational poem someone can put on the stage. Let's give that person the most points.
Yeah, yeah. Rewarding the exotic, the
Exactly.
sensational, totally. You are very much in line with our program because we're very much a narrative therapy program
Oh,
here at
great.
CIIS.
I
So
should take that program.
I was telling some of the other professors I was speaking to you today, and they were mad jealous, I gotta say.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, our program adores you.
Love that.
But I appreciate you naming narrative therapy and the idea that you know, it's not just a story is not just us, right? It's not so solid, and it's not just that we create it. Our everyone in our circle, our sphere, influences our story, and in order to create a new one, we have to have new people. We have to have people a part of that story to receive that new story. And I appreciate you naming, you know, that a witness is a part of that. But if a witness doesn't know how to do that, like how that could fall apart. So yeah, there's some effort in the poetry groups that I run and some people in our program, like teaching people how to be a witness, right?
Oh,
Like it
love
is,
it.
it's a skill. Like, you know,
Oh,
we can't
yeah.
just assume that people will know how to be in healing community. It's
Oh,
not just
no.
about writing your story, telling it, having the courage to speak it out. Like you have to have the courage to be, you know, a loving, active witness too, which sometimes I think is actually a little bit harder.
Totally. I would totally agree.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, you're talking a bit about ritual. Slam is so
Yeah.
ritual. Poetry is such a ritual. And your book, your book is full of them.
That's
Like,
true. Yeah, there's
yeah,
30 rituals in here.
yeah. It's like I love how it's structured, that you have, you know, an essay and then really a ritual following each. And I'm curious about that. I'm curious about your choice to actually have action in that, suggestions for people, and you know, which one's your favorite,
Mm,
if you have one?
yeah. Well, so in the book, there's 30 love letters, and then after each love letter, there is a ritual prompt that like folks can do. And I mean, I love them all, but my favorite one is like I'm trying to find the specific one so I can get the wording right, but I might not be able to. But it's yes, here it is. Collect a bag of stones. Give each stone the name of something you've been holding on to that you'd like to let go of. Take the stones to a river or ocean and drop them in.
Mm.
I love that one. I feel like I don't even know, like I used to make up rituals for myself all the time, and that's when I did, you know, like 10 years ago or something like that. And I keep on thinking I need to do it again. You know, for me, I really wanted to make the book an embodied experience for people, which is
Yeah,
hard to do with books because, you know, by nature, you're usually reading them alone.
totally.
You know,
Totally.
and then, you know, it's language, it goes into the mind, you know, that sort of thing. And I just wanted to create portals for people to take the love letters into their own lives and experiment with them and make their own conclusions. For me, you know, I'm a big sucker for any like kind of like applied arts, right? Like I
Mm.
love theater of the oppressed. I love spoken word poetry. Anything where like the art is like relational
Yeah,
and embodied. And I wanted to make this book like a part of that.
yeah, yeah. Actually, uh, be more alive.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. I will say, I think for a lot of these books, when I see those kinds of things, I just gloss them over. You know, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Real.
I'll come back to
I'll
this.
come back to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that one day. But you know, I felt really compelled with yours to try it.
Did you do it? Oh my God, what did you
I
do?
did. I stopped reading. I was like, let me just stop. You had something about go read a childhood book.
Oh, yes.
I think it was after J.K. Rowling's thing. Let me see.
Yes.
Read
Or
a
maybe it was
children-
the Animorphs. Yes, read a children's book.
Yeah, read a children's book you used to love. Do you still love it?
Oh.
And I, for some reason, what came to mind was, oh man, what was that book called? It's the one with it's a fish with like the glitter. I don't know what it's called. What was that book called?
Oh, Rainbow Fish?
Rainbow Fish.
Yeah. Oh my God, I could talk forever about Rainbow Fish.
Oh man, I was like, I remember liking it, and I don't remember why. So I read it. I read it. And oh man, yeah, I love it for a way different reason. Now. I was like, oh man, I didn't know I got this kind of truth spilled on me when I was like 5 or whenever that came out. But yeah, I think I really appreciated your call to do that. And I thought there's the intention, there's the heart in that, but there's so much play in your invitations. And I was really appreciating that, the spectrum that love and being human can be. You really encapsulate that in a lot of your work, and I appreciate that. I appreciated the reading Rainbow Fish again.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did that.
I did. I need to share my sparkly gills with people, and that is what I learned in that. I'm kind of want to shift just a little bit, because what you were talking about slam, you were also, what kind of came to mind was also a little bit about cancel culture. You were talking about, the scene kind of collapsing, and often what happens in a lot of these scenes is a vitriol, expelling people from the scene. And you did this really wonderful thing. You talk quite a bit about cancel culture, but you made really interesting parallels between like moralistic performativity and chastisement, the sinner and the problematic person, and the connection between how religious communities and social justice circles ostracize people for like their lack of faith in whatever the mission, the spirituality is. And wonderful parallels. I've never seen that made before. I was really stunned how similar. And I was also curious, for folks engaging in or wanting to, would you give to them in that community, trying to repair after a harm has occurred, and that kind of like walking the line between accountability and forgiveness?
Yeah. Oh, the deep question.
It's so easy. Just the easiest question.
No, I'm so glad you asked, though. Let's think about the slam. The way I've experienced poetry slam is there's sort of 2 categories of harm. One is the harm that can happen on the stage when a poet, usually like a newer poet, does a poem and it's offensive. And usually they do not know that it's offensive, but it can be, right? And, especially in the mid-2010s, I was seeing all kinds of like misogynist, homophobic, racist poems. And I was like, oh no, someone should have vetted this. Oh my God. And then there's the harm that happens off the stage, which is like when people in the community, and often these poetry slams are happening in bars, at night and stuff. And so, well, I mean, it's not the bars or the nighttime that's doing this, but some people are doing things that are like creepy, not cool, non-consensual. So those are the kinds of harms that I tend to see, in poetry.
I appreciate you making that clarification, because I think a lot of people will blame alcohol, substances, the venue for the harm that happened, and not that someone made a choice in those particular spaces to cause harm.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's more like people are in a bar, or in a, and drinking, and they'll think, this gives me an excuse or like some cover to make some bad choices, right? And that's, really unfortunate. But of course, bad choices can be made anywhere.
Totally.
But yeah, when I think about the rupture, like the ripple effect that happens after these kinds of harms, for folks seeking repair, I guess that depends on what position you're in, the role of harm doer, the role of harmed, or the role of witness. We come back to that triangle of three, and I would say, for the person in the role of harm doer, which is where we tend to put the most kind of spotlight when we're having the conversation, put the pressure there, right? I would say it's really, to me, about, if we're seeking repair, separating our humanity, like our human goodness, from the fact that we have done something hurtful. If we collapse those two things, like that we are human beings and we want to be good, and also that we have harmed somebody, then it becomes the intensity of the pain and the shame and the fear that comes from that actually tends to make it too difficult like to acknowledge what we have done, or to work through it in a good way. If we are able to hold on to our goodness, like to know that we are good, and be aware that even when we are good, we sometimes do harmful things, I actually think it becomes a lot easier to do the repair work. I really struggle with this word accountability, because I think people use it to mean way too many things. But if I focus on it, I sort of think account means a story, and ability means capacity. And for me, accountability, maybe we could think of it as the capacity to hold someone else's story of how you have hurt them. Right, to be truthful about it, and then to act on that story in reparative ways, without collapsing, right? I think the tendencies I see, and this is maybe goes back to the somatic, is we either completely flee and deny that we've harmed people, or we collapse and we're like, I'll do whatever, oh my God. And actually neither of those things is quite right when it comes to justice, because we need to be able to respond when somebody has told us that we've harmed them in a grounded and centered way. When it comes to the person who has experienced harm, the first thing people ask me is, why are you always telling people to forgive? And I'm like, I think that might be a misunderstanding of what I'm saying. I am not telling people to forgive, although I think forgiveness is nice, but it's not really about forgiveness. It's much more about being compassionate first with ourselves. And this is like a hidden part of being, a survivor, I think. Being compassionate with ourselves for having been someone who was harmed. Like, the anger we feel toward ourselves at having, quote unquote, allowed ourselves to be harmed, which of course no one really does. But, I think that hidden anger at ourselves is what makes it so hard to be in the process of repair. If we are asking the person who has harmed us to be responsible for our internal healing, we're probably going to be disappointed, because that person usually cannot do it. Like, what do I mean? I sort of mean, like, often when we are harmed, we want to reach out and touch the person who has harmed us, grab them by the metaphorical shoulders and say, how could you do that to me? How could you do that to me? Tell me that I am not a person who deserved what you did. You make me feel like I didn't deserve what you did. And maybe they do that, and that would be really great if they could. But actually, inside of ourselves, we need to know we didn't deserve to be harmed. And then the last thing I'll say about this is, actually, we put so much pressure on survivor and on perpetrator. So much pressure to do things right. It's unfair to the survivor, not possible for the perpetrator, usually. It is the witness, the community, I think, that bears so much of the hidden responsibility for making repair possible, because if we shun survivors and say, we're not going to believe you, then it's not going to be possible. If we exile perpetrators and we're like, well, let's get rid of all the perpetrators, also repair is not going to be possible. It is up to the witness, because the witness is not the one who's directly implicated, right? To be able to gift the community with our wisdom. And that's what I'd like to see in poetry communities and beyond, that it is the third parties who are able to create that safe enough space for repair to occur.
Yeah. Oh, man, there's so much there. Um, there's so much. And just what's really sticking out to me is in your book, you talk about the violence for justice and I think the violence for domination. And that seems to be like all about, predominantly about the witness, about the way that the witness
Indeed.
enacts justice, which is our word for repair, I guess,
Yeah,
but
I
actually
think so.
is not repair. It's just
No.
it's about punishment.
Yeah.
And I'm curious. I'm curious about that responsibility. Like how, what I don't, yeah, the weight of that responsibility on the witness, um, to help people repair, in a system that's really actually just about justice, and in one where someone maybe, if someone who has caused harm is not, you know, owning their part, their role in the harm, and for a survivor who really wants harm to happen to the person who harmed them, how hard is it to be in that space as the witness, as the mediator, for repair, like actual repair.
Oh, yeah.
um yeah.
I mean, I think it's incredibly painful to watch. Like,
Yeah.
it's painful to watch someone who has caused harm refuse responsibility, and it's painful to watch someone who has experienced harm demand revenge. Although I have noticed that lots of witnesses really love the demand for revenge too,
Yeah.
because then we get to put all of our own stuff in there,
Yeah.
And the reason I say, we put too much pressure on harm doers and people who have experienced harm, and that the responsibility lies with the witness, is because the witness tends to be a collective body. There
Yeah.
tends to be like a group of us, right? Whereas when it comes to, survivors and perpetrators of harm, it usually tends to be one-on-one or a small group on another smaller group, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, like, when we have a collective, of witnesses, we're able to draw more on collective wisdom, the
Totally.
collective nervous system, right? Um, and I really think it comes back to, I think about Debbie Young all the time because she's such a, influential figure in my poetry life. She has this poem where, the refrain is, "Where are our elders?" And
Hmm.
I think about that all the time, in poetry community, in queer community, in activist community. We really need to have elders, not just, older people, but people who are, we all have to step into the leadership role at some point in time, like, to create the wisdom of like how to respond. And by that, I really mean on a practical level, when um, when there is a person causing harm and they refuse to see it and they keep on doing it, then we actually really need to be able to say, with discernment, like, okay, maybe you need to stop doing poems for a while, right? Maybe you need to stop performing for a while in a judicious way. Like, not like you need to stop performing and we'll never, we will drive you out of the community, but like, maybe stop doing these poems until you can do poems that, aren't racist anymore. And when you see, a survivor who is demanding revenge, the real discernment there of the witness is like saying, your anger is justified
Yeah.
and this behavior cannot happen.
Hmm.
Right. And it takes courage to say that to someone because it's terrifying. And we feel shame maybe when we say that, but we have to be able to create the community that we want. And when I say, this question, where are our elders? What I really mean is, where is the strength in all of us, to be witnesses who have that skill of responding in the right way? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And yes, in these arts communities, yes, in our criminal justice system. But what was really striking to me is how this relates to family violence, and
Yeah.
the way that we have, as a community, as neighbors, as people, as friends, have so much fear with responding, have so much fear for responding in the wrong way or trusting our guts.
Mm.
That we have put so much power on this other, the system, a criminal justice system to do it for us,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't have that same wisdom. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the people, in the system do definitely. I'm not,
Sure. They're
washing over.
huge. Yeah.
It's lots of people. There's
Yeah.
lots of them, and they're wonderful. But we, see so much more harm happening to families as a
Yes.
consequence of being involved in that system, and there's a big movement to decriminalize domestic violence and to have more of a community-oriented response to
Mm.
violence, because family, neighbors, community tends to have that wisdom that you're talking about, have the
Yeah.
tools to respond in a way that can actually uh, intervene in violence, and not perpetrate it, continue it in just new forms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I hear that, and I really appreciate you saying you're talking about holding multitudes, that we can feel, we don't have to do, right? We
Exactly.
can feel anger and not act on it. We can be informed by that. Actually, listening to your anger is probably a good idea, but acting
Totally.
on it, just doing something immediately isn't always the best idea. And that separation too of you can do harm, you can behave in harmful ways, in violent ways, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a violent person. Like, to call someone an abuser or problematic or a criminal, right? It gets them trapped in that identity, and then where's the room for love? Where's the room for repair? It just is who you are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I appreciate this conversation, and I know also listening to a lot of survivors where they want to call someone the abuser, they want to be the victim, because these are some identities that help their pain make sense.
Yes, indeed.
But it
Indeed.
actually doesn't really lead to transformative healing. It just leads to numbing, I think, actually, in a way.
I think so. And it takes time, right? Like, it's a long
Totally.
process. When I was in clinical practice, which was now a minute ago, I worked with a lot of teenagers and young adults who had experienced family violence, of horrific kinds, as I'm sure you have as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, one is not going to tell a teenager, like, it's time to forgive and not ask for vengeance. Like, actually, we're going to be like, what if you made some art about your amazing vengeance? Like, and
Totally.
then talked about it. But I was also amazed by some of those young people who, they had many considerations and took many paths, amongst them, but quite a few actually, given the space that they really needed. Maybe it also helped that all of my clients tended to be trans and very steeped in, like, transformative justice,
Mm.
zine culture or whatever. So many of them came to the conclusion that they were allowed to hate the family members who had hurt them so
Yeah.
badly, that they were allowed to feel that rage, and that seeking vengeance would not improve their lives, that they were allowed to feel rage, they were allowed to not forgive, but that acts of healing were not acts of vengeance, but
Mm.
acts of love for themselves, right? And
Mhm.
I mean, I just think that's so important. Uh, on a global level, I think, the danger of over identifying with the role of oppressed or the role of survivor or the role of victim is, again, that we perpetrate cycles of violence. I'm probably wading too deep here, but I think so much about how the current conflict we are seeing in Gaza is in real time being justified on social media
Oh,
by
yeah.
by the Israeli nation state, with this language of, like, those people are the terrorists and we need to crush them in order to be
Yeah.
safe. And, like, the holding multitudes is about knowing the actions of murdering Israeli citizens is not okay. And also murdering, untold thousands of people in Gaza is not an okay response either. And on a historical level, of course, there is a much bigger picture around the ways that Palestinian people in the Palestinian territories have experienced oppression for, 75 years now. And we have to be able to hold the multitude. It's not like, I don't think the solution really can be on an emotional level to say, well, one pain matters and another doesn't.
Right.
All the pain matters, but also we need perspective, right? And this is like the deep wisdom, I think, of holding multiple truths, is being able to say, okay, yeah, like lots of things are hurting and like no atrocity is okay. And let's also use our discernment to see, like, what are the power dynamics? What are the real answers? What are the social conditions
Yeah.
that lead to the perpetration of ongoing violence?
Totally. Yeah. And there's a current or a near history of this climate, of this trauma, but it's also like generations. This is
Exactly.
historical trauma and
Exactly.
Trauma decontextualized. I mean, it's sort of in the same place and also not. There's all these different bodies of trauma coming into this one moment that really requires you to pause and look so far out that we aren't in a culture of pausing. We're in in this moment, it's a culture of responding. It's a culture of defense, immediate protection, and not thinking. And when you're in the middle of crisis, when you're in the middle of trauma, like you can't think. Our brains are not designed to do that. It requires us to do the practice of stepping back and regulating, calming, and that's not something we can do alone. That's something that takes a community to do.
Absolutely.
In order to get to that place of turning towards love and true repair, which is just, yeah, it's that's so dense and painful. It's really painful. And I appreciate you bringing like our specific, circumstance of what's happening in our world to the forefront within this conversation. I'm seeing that we're getting kind of close to time. I'm wondering, I could talk to you forever about this.
Same.
I'm wondering if there's anything that we didn't speak about that you really want to make sure is honored, is voice, that folks get an opportunity to witness. Yeah.
Oh gosh, I mean, you're such an amazing interviewer. I was like, wow, we really went deep.
Thank you.
Just trying to think. Oh yeah, okay. Well, there's one thing, and I'm still figuring out what this book is. It's so great to get to do so many interviews because I'm like, oh, what is this? What am I really saying? I think so I wrote Falling Back in Love with Being Human as a 6th book. The 5th before it was called I Hope We Choose Love. And, there's this sort of extended inquiry or study I'm doing of like, through my own body, how can I love human beings? And like wrapped into that is all this stuff we just talked about, with like harm and monstrosity and like pain and violence and justification, all that kind of stuff. I think something I just want to say into the universe as like an incantation or like a spell or an invitation is like I think when we talk about how to do love, how to be a more loving society, there can sometimes be this strain, of like, oh well, we're probably not going to do that, or I can't do that, we're probably not going to be a society right away that is, more loving and abolishes prisons and doesn't do war. It's probably not going to happen right away, or even in our lifetimes or in many lifetimes. And I, as an individual human being, am probably not going to stop being a person who wants to punish, wants revenge, does hurtful things, to my beloved partner, after they don't do the dishes when I want them to, etc. Like that's probably not going to stop. I think where love comes in is like not just about I'm telling myself this. Love is not telling people to be more loving, like wagging the finger and being like, oh, you should be more loving, or even pointing the finger at oneself and being like, oh, you should be more loving too. Like I really think that the deepest practice of this that I can find is knowing that we have failed, knowing that I'm going to fail. You know, communities are going to punish people and exile people, and we are going to demand revenge, and harm is going to happen in cycles. And we might slow it down or change it. I do believe we can make great change, but also we are going to fail, and we are going to be monstrous. And I think the practice of falling back in love with being human is loving ourselves and others anyway.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the last thing.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. All right. That's just wonderful. I really feel that, and I think in our program we really talk about, you know, you're gonna mess up.
Yes.
Whatever skill you learn in this program, you're gonna fail it. The biggest thing that you could learn is how to own that and be like geared for repair. That is the number one skill we try to help teach, which is hard, but
It's the hardest one.
yeah, but it reduces, I think, a lot of that pressure to be perfect, and that you
Agreed.
have to show up, that you don't have to be ashamed. You know, quit shooting all over yourself, right? Like about how you're supposed to show up. Just show up and be yourself, and be willing. I think that's huge. So thank you for that. I know we are going to transition to questions from our witnesses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring a couple in. This is from Miro. What can loving ourselves through conflict look or feel like somatically without othering those we may be in conflict with?
Such a good question. Yes, you know, I think conflict is very triggering in the body, and we know, you know, as trauma people, people who have experienced trauma and people who think about trauma, we know that when we are triggered, you know, the body tends to go into binaries. You know, I am good and they are bad, or they are good and I am bad. I am right and they are wrong, or vice versa. And where love comes in is like really, I think about taking the pause, maybe taking the breath. And I mean, I like to do this hand on the heart thing. That's
such a therapist thing to do.
I know, right? It's like the most therapist thing possible. And I'm like, you put the hand on the heart, you know, and like really, you know, feeling through this possibility that maybe I am wrong and I'm still lovable, you know? Or maybe they are wrong and I don't need to hurt them or other them in order to stay in contact with myself. Like really it is about the like we are separate from our conflict, you know, connected, but we are distinct. Yeah, and so much of conflict is like this unwanted reflection. Like, you know, when we're in conflict, it's like this like surprise, here's all your triggers, here's your shadow, here's the stuff you don't like about yourself and the other person. It's very overwhelming. And you know, really again, like I think, you know, thematically it is about not having to be right, not needing to fear the possibility that part of what the conflict is showing us about ourselves is true, knowing that we're lovable anyway.
And holding while you do
Yeah.
that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm very bad at this, you know. The reason I talk about all this shit all the time is because I'm like, I just flip out, you know, but I think that is how it works. It has gotten better for me since I started practicing it this way.
Yeah. Wonderful. I'm doing this now. I'm holding myself with these questions. All right. So the next one is, how do we begin to cultivate our own witness?
Oh. Well, you know, the languaging of this question reminds me a bit of like the lineages of like Theravada Buddhism, and I think there's actually some technical answers inside of like Buddhist practice that I probably am not qualified to answer, in that way. If we're talking about like the cultivation of a spiritual self-witness in the Buddhist way, I'm not like a Buddhist teacher, right? So I probably don't know. But on a more lay person level or a somatic level, I really like the language of parts. I know internal family systems is having a moment in the limelight right now, which is good, I think. But we don't have to know that system particularly just to be like, humans are fractal and we have many layers and many facets. And like a very basic skill of self-insightfulness or self-mindfulness is knowing that whatever we are doing in the moment, whatever we are feeling in the moment is a part of us. And we are like actually infinitely bigger than that, right? And just kind of reminding ourselves of that, like even in retrospect, often we are, absorbed by a trigger, like the moment that we are in, and it's sort of hard to think about like what are all the other parts of me. But if we can pause, or after the thing has happened, to take a moment to review and be like, that was one part of me. What were the other parts of me? I think that is like a good way to cultivate that.
For sure. If it, I just want to add to that.
Please.
We're talking about poetry. We've been talking about the arts. Like you can use the arts as a way to witness yourself. You said, who am I? What am I trying to do? You get an opportunity to look at yourself and look at these parts. So, and there's lots of ways to do that. Writing a poem, writing a book is a way to do that. But you can also do some, externalized parts work where you actually write from the perspective of that part of you. And do some drama therapy, talk to the part in your room. You can, drama therapists love putting on scarves, so put on something.
They do love the scarves.
They love scarves. They love them. Put on a scarf and be it. If that feels safe for you. I know some folks that's harder. Or even creating images. There's lots of ways to actually use the arts as a way to take something out of yourself and to look at it and be in conversation with it. That can nurture, what you were just speaking about.
You're such a, I want to take your program. That's
great. Wonderful. We would love to have you. Even, just to be in community with you. I think you bring a lot to that particular intersection of poetry and the body, which I think in some ways poetry people can get really focused on the word, and the cognitive feel really cut off from the rest of them. And I appreciate that you're bringing a full experience to that.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So let me see another question. Do you think something is lost when we focus too much on not causing offense?
Oh, controversial. Such a relevant question for spoken word poets, eh?
Oh man.
Yes, I think yes. If that is the frame, if that is the framework, then absolutely. I do think that something is lost. If we go back to, kind of psychological or psychodynamic language, like if what we're worried about is being offensive, and then we're, kind of repressing into the shadow all of the parts of ourselves, all of our words and feelings that we fear may be offensive, then yeah, I think we lose a lot of poetry from a poetry perspective. And from a life perspective, I think we lose a lot of authenticity, which then means we lose depth of relationship. Yes. And I think the nuance on that often gets missed in the public discourse around freedom of speech and cancel culture and whatnot is that absolutely I want us to be free to not worry, like, am I being politically correct all the time? That's sort of what, therapy and the arts are both for in many different ways. And that doesn't mean we should just spew all of our stuff all over people, because the truth is that speech acts can harm, which is different from causing offense. And so I think, the question is much more, how do I create a poem that is in integrity with myself and in dialogue with community, right? Like when I was in Poetry Slam, I hear all these guys would go up and do these like very misogynist poems about women they were dating. And I'm like, I don't want those people to be like, I should be not offensive and like not write my poem, but I am also like, maybe write your poem in dialogue with some actual women, you know? And that is different. That actually is not about shrinking in. That's about moving outward and having a dialogue. And that's the thing about freedom of speech, I think, is like it's not just about saying whatever you want, it's about being in dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't just go up to a mic and, spit your truth and then walk away from it. People can respond to you.
Yeah, that's why it's a live art form.
Yeah, I time and place sometimes too. Okay, appreciate that one. There is, let me see this question. All right, what is the relationship between pain or having been harmed and being able to love? Is there no possibility of accountability or receiving justice for severe harms? How do we open to love now?
Oh, yeah. This question comes up like about once a month for me in like various types of group settings, and I also appreciate that because I think it means that like as a collective, it's cycling for us. We're stuck with it, and I like to deepen into it each time. I have to say, I think it makes all the sense in the world to crave justice and to long for justice. I crave and long for justice all the time.
Yeah.
And absolutely in my life, some of the most grievous, painful, terrible things that have happened to me are not things I'm going to get external justice for. I am never going to hear certain people in my life say, I'm sorry I did that to you. They're just not going to happen. They're dead or they're like far away. They're not going to do it. I will not have justice. And that's very painful sometimes. And yet I am open to love. Like, I'm like, okay, like, proof of one in concept, and how does that happen? Well, I think a lot about forgiveness. Oprah Winfrey, who, actually is a fount of wisdom, also bad stuff sometimes. It's both. She's complex.
I mean, to your point about multitudes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
She says that forgiveness is about accepting that we cannot change the past. Which I fucking love. Fucking love that. I've spent a long time meditating on that wisdom from Oprah Winfrey. Because I think, there's four aspects of forgiveness, and two are about the person who has harmed us. One aspect of that is accepting that person can't change the past. Like they can't come back and undo the harm they did to us. It's done. The other is believing that they could be different moving forward. That's what it takes to forgive someone else, knowing that they can't undo the harm and believing they could be different going forward. And sometimes people are not demonstrating that this is true. Like they're not demonstrating that they can be different going forward. They are always demonstrating that they can't change the past because no one can change the past. So, we got one aspect covered. The other two are about ourselves. And one is that knowing, accepting that we could not have been a different kind of person in the moment we were harmed, which is to say, we could not have stopped the harm from happening to us, because if we could have, we would have.
Yeah.
And then, the forward-looking aspect of that is knowing that we are not defined by the harm that has happened to us. So there are three aspects of forgiveness that are kind of within our purview. We can't, that kind of are in our control. Nobody can change the past, and we can work on accepting that. We cannot change who we were when we were harmed. We can work on accepting that. And we are not defined by what has happened to us in the past, and we can work on accepting that. And I think if we do all three of those things, I mean, we leave the fourth thing, to the person who has harmed us in their own journey, because we can't control it. But I think those three are enough to be open to love.
That there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm feeling that. I think the forgiveness, especially of who you were when it happened, and what you could or couldn't do, I think is sometimes I think is one of the harder parts for people to sit with, and it's painful, and to just I think be with your pain, I think is a part of that process, to not ignore it,
Mhm. Mhm.
and to not fuel it into something else, to just allow it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The somatics
I
breath.
know. They're like, ah.
Oh man. I've been trained in the CIIS way of this. I gotta say, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Okay,
And we
another
can laugh
question.
at it because it is very West Coast ridiculous. You know?
Yeah, we can be ridiculous and love
Oh
ourselves,
my
right? There's
God. I think being ridiculous is why I love myself.
That's right. That's right.
Oh.
Okay, so if you could revisit, rewrite, or add anything to your spell book from 2023, what would that be?
Oh, such a good question. I mean, in some ways, it's like the baby is born and like we can't add anything to it. But if I'm really forced to, I'm just flipping through. I I think I would have written a letter to my anger. There isn't actually,
Mm,
there's like hints and stuff, but there isn't
yeah,
actually like a to my rage.
yeah,
And I think that's because I just that was like part of in the shadow for me, and I like just didn't think about it. But certainly, with the questions I get now from audiences and the things I'm thinking about myself, I would have written a letter to my rage.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's in there.
The
It's in,
rage is present.
oh yeah, it's in there. Just she they doesn't get a full essay yet.
Exactly. Someday soon.
Yeah. Or okay, so flipping that or
Mm.
not, it's in the same energetic
Mhm.
vibe, I think. What are some things that are bringing you joy right now?
Oh. Um, well, I I really never thought that I was going to live this long. Um,
Mhm.
I think a lot of people who are marginalized feel that way. And
Yeah.
so I am doing this thing about like planning, if maybe I am going to live longer, what am I going to do with my life? And that's pretty amazing and scary,
Yeah.
but it is pretty joyful. And I think I'm witnessing a lot of people. The world is descending into like horror and chaos, but I am also seeing, I think people really rising to that occasion, like asking the big questions about, what does it mean to love and to pursue survival and social change through the lens of love, in a way that I wasn't really seeing, in say 2016 or 2021 when I started writing the book. Um, and that gives me a lot of hope, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I started dating this really cute boy recently, so that's giving me joy too.
Wonderful. I appreciate you naming the joy of believing that you will be alive, and how radical it is to claim that, to be in that, to date someone believing that there will be more days.
I know, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I've definitely been there before. So I appreciate you naming that.
Thank you.
So there's one more question, really in a similar vibe of you talking about, being in a marginalized body.
Mm.
For those of us who exist in bodies that are stigmatized and targeted on a regular basis, how do we open ourselves to love when the world feels so unsafe? And how do we open ourselves and still protect ourselves?
Mm. Yeah. You know, I think this question is this is also a question that I come up with. And by come up with, I mean people ask it of me about 6 times a month, maybe. And then whenever I go to a talk or a class or a training, I am the one who is asking it because I'm like, I need to know how to answer this when people ask me. But also I'm asking for myself. It's so haunting, right? Like, I yearn to be open to love, but also opening to love is, opening to all the pain that might come next, which really is, the struggle of being human. But, on a practical level, I would say marginalization, stigmatization means that we are being bombarded with negative messages about ourselves, like the message that we're bad and monstrous and that just being near us is somehow bad, or painful. I'm a trans woman. People are saying just being near me turns people gay, which kind of is a good thing. But, there is this kind of stigma. And I guess I have 2 answers for this. One is like the practical therapeutic answer, which is, we can think of the armor, the closedness we create for ourselves as a particular somatic shape. And if we do that cultivation of of awareness, self-awareness, knowing our parts, we are able maybe to create that armor and hold it for ourselves most of the time while knowing there is something softer inside and making the choice to, when we assess the risk to be okay, letting that armor down a little bit, in spaces where we trust our community, where there are loved ones, where we're dating someone who seems like, they've been pretty good for 15 dates in a row, like we can start to open intentionally and close intentionally as well, when we need to close our armor again. That's the kind of the somatic answer. On a spiritual level, I will say there's another approach, and that approach I think is about radicalism. There's like the somatic slow answer, and then there's also this part of me I know that has also kept me alive in certain ways, that is about embracing the risk. I think here about, I've been thinking a lot lately about the Bodhisattva Kuan Yin, who is in, Chinese mythology known as the goddess of compassion, who is a goddess who, actually like literally made like medicine from her own flesh to heal her abusive father, which is a terrifying kind of story. It's like, whoa, it was one of these Buddhist stories about self-sacrifice. I am not saying that we should sacrifice ourselves for other people, but I am saying there is something very powerful in the radical choice to be open to love, despite the risk and the pain that might come next. And I think we can have both of these approaches, the intense radical and like the slow and gradated, for choosing love. And that gives us more options, maybe,
Yeah, yeah. And that the what I'm getting from that is about stepping into power, stepping into your power to be, and how that can make people afraid of you. To be in your power makes people afraid, especially if they're not in that. But that doesn't mean that you should make yourself small,
Exactly.
For somebody else's fear.
Exactly.
And to be loving and open, that takes a lot. It takes a lot of courage, but that's for you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, what a conversation this has been, Kai Cheng Thom. I am so grateful that I got to talk to you, to read your book. Like you said, the baby has been born. Falling Back in Love with Being Human, Letters to Lost Souls.
Thank
It is a
you.
gorgeous collection of poetic essays and rituals. Do them, put the book down, and go read that children's book again.
Yes, rainbow fish.
And it's so, what a gift that you've given us about, turning back to ourselves. So thank you for sharing this time with our community, with public programs, with CIIS. And if folks can get your book, I encourage you to buy it. It's linked on this event page. And yeah, thank you for sharing space with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for your beautiful questions and your general amazing attunedness. Jenna, it's been such a delight to get to talk about the book with someone as wise and experienced and skillful as you. So thank you, and thanks to our wonderful audience and to CIIS. It's from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you.